My name is Jeff Wilson. By day, I invest in tech companies, and at night, I invest in sports cards. Join me on my journey to profit from the hobby we all love. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Sports Card Investor. I'm Jeff Wilson, and in today's episode, we tackle the question of, do fantasy football projections indicate good football card investments for this upcoming season? Because wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if we could all simply go look at the fantasy football projections right now and go buy the cards of the very top players in those projections and know that by the end of this season, those cards are all going to be worth a lot more money than they are today? But is it that simple? Well, that's the question that I have been looking at over the last couple of weeks, and I'm excited to share the results with you here in just a minute of what I found. But first, I wanted to let you know that I have set up a Discord server. This was actually the request of some people who have been listening to this YouTube show and podcast, and they've said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could build a community of people who are into sports card investing or who enjoy this content and would like to talk about what sports cards they're buying from an investment standpoint and why they're buying them. And wouldn't it be great if we had that online community? And somebody suggested to me that we use Discord to do that. Discord is a really easy to use chat program, completely free. So I have set up a Sports Card Investor Discord server. It is brand new as of today. And I invite you to join. I'm going to put the link to that server in the show notes, both on my YouTube channel, in the show description, as well as in my podcast. And I'm also going to link to it on my website, sportscardinvestor.com. So please join me on Discord to keep the conversation going after this show. So it is that time of year. It is time for fantasy football. I love August because when August comes around every year, I know it is time for fantasy football to restart. And I really enjoy fantasy football. I have been playing in this fantasy football league with this great commissioner. His name's Don, good friend of mine, for more than 15 years. We've had this fantasy football league up and going. And in fact, now we have two leagues with a lot of the same players. One is your standard, snake draft league where you draft every year. But the other league is an auction dynasty league. And if you've never done an auction draft before, you are missing out, because an auction draft is a lot of fun. It's a lot more strategy than your typical snake draft. And the cool thing about an auction draft is you're guaranteed to go get the couple of players you want if you're willing to spend the money on them. So if you go into the draft saying, man, I've got to have Patrick Mahomes or I've got to have Saquon Barkley, that guy is yours. You just have to pony up the cash. Now, of course, you're going to pay a lot for those guys, and it may mean that the rest of your roster is not as strong. But it's cool in an auction league that you have that type of authority. It's truly more strategic and makes you more of a general manager. And when you combine an auction league with a dynasty league where the players are carrying over from year to year, so people who you draft this year and you pay money for this year, you're going to have those guys on your roster again next year unless you choose to cut them to free back up that money. So when you combine the auction and the dynasty, it is like the ultimate form of fantasy football strategy. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, try to get a group of friends together and build an auction dynasty league. It obviously has to be a group that's going to stick together year after year for the league to really work. But man, that's a lot of fun. And last year, I joined a third league. I try not to join too many. I'm sure some of you are probably like in 10 different leagues. I really try not to join too many because honestly, I don't have the time to do it well between investing in tech companies and running a tech company and trying to put together content for this show. I don't have a whole lot of time to be playing, in a bunch of fantasy football leagues, but I did join a third league last year. This one was fun. It was, first of all, an in-person draft, which I've always wanted to do. So you're drafting with your friends in person, but it was also a best ball format. And if you've never played best ball, basically what you do is you draft your team and then that's it. There's no management during the year. Whatever team you draft, those are the players you are stuck with the entire season. And you hope that they don't get injured and that they hold up and that those guys are still producing late in the season. So it's a totally different type of strategy, but also much easier from a management standpoint because all you have to do is prepare for the draft. And then at that point, your fate is sealed. And that got me thinking. As I was starting to think about the best ball draft this year and what players I might want to draft, it got me thinking, are these same players whose sports cards I should be buying? Should I be buying the cards of these guys who are atop the fantasy rankings with the thought that over the course of this season, the value of those football cards would increase, and at the end of the season, I'd be able to sell them off for a profit? And so my curiosity took me back to last season, and I said, well, it would be pretty easy to go back and see how this would have played out last season. First of all, I wanted to look at the top 12 point scorers of fantasy football last year. So the guys who ended last year as your top 12 point scorers in fantasy football. Did those guys see their cards appreciate over the course of the season? And if so, how much? So what I did was I pulled the data from fantasy football last year and I looked at PPR, a standard scoring, but with a PPR component to it. And the number one guy last year, no surprise, in fantasy football was Patrick Mahomes. So then I looked at Patrick Mahomes' 2017 Contenders Rookie Ticket Auto PSA 10. So for most of the guys on this list, I went back to Contenders and looked at their Rookie Ticket Auto when I could. And in most cases, I looked at it graded if they had enough graded cards out there. And I simply looked at what their cards were selling for on eBay in an auction format the few weeks before the season started versus what their cards were selling for. The same cards were selling for the few weeks after the season ended on eBay in an auction format. So for example, Patrick Mahomes, your number one guy in fantasy football last year. To start the season, you could have gotten his 2017 Contenders Rookie Ticket Auto PSA 10 for $729. At the end of the season, $4,100. A percentage increase of 462%. So clearly, Patrick Mahomes was an amazing investment last year. Now, of course, nobody thought that he was going to be the number one production guy, come the end of the season. Nobody thought that at the beginning of the season, right? But if you had a hunch on the guy and took a chance on him, an amazing appreciation. But what about the other guys on the list? Number 2 fantasy football production guy last year, Saquon Barkley. This is an interesting case. At the beginning of the season, his cards were $520. At the end of the season, $340. But he was the number 2 production guy all of last year. Now, in his case, we're looking at the Contenders Draft Auto number to 15. That was the card that I used because, of course, at the beginning of the season, he was a rookie last year, so there were very, very few cards out. And I think what happened with him, and this is the case, I think, with a lot of rookies, is right when their cards come out for the first time, there's such excitement over them that their cards are trading for really high prices. And the Contenders Draft cards are one of the very first set of football cards that come out every year. But then as the season goes on, more and more brands of cards start coming out, including cards with the guy's actual NFL team uniform, not his college uniform. And even though Saquon Barkley had an amazing season last year, was the number 2 point scorer in all of fantasy football, his Contenders Draft cards went down in price and were worth less at the end of the season than the beginning of the season. So there's a lesson right there. Buying rookie cards of rookie players early before the season starts, probably not a good time to buy. There's a lot of hype around those guys, and there's also not a lot of cards out yet. So there's a lot of demand for very little supply. And by the end of the year, no matter how good they do, by the end of the year, their prices are probably going to fall. At least that's what we saw last year with Saquon Barkley. The number 3 guy, Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey started the season. This is his 2017 Contenders Rookie Ticket Auto PSA 10. Started the season at $145 for that card. Ended the season at $202. A 39% increase over the course of the season. Makes sense. He had a really good season last year. Number 4 production was Todd Gurley. Now, Todd Gurley is an interesting one because he had a great year up until the end. And then he was dealing with his injury issues. There were a lot of questions about him not playing more during the playoffs. He really didn't have much impact late in the playoffs or in the Super Bowl. His cards, his 2015 Rookie Ticket Auto PSA 10 started at $140 at the beginning of the year And at the end of the year, it was selling for exactly $140. No change. And I suspect it would have gone up if he had ended the year in a stronger fashion. But because he didn't, there's question marks about him and his injury risk even for the year. The number 5 guy last year, Matt Ryan. Very surprising season for Matt Ryan. A lot of people did not have him, even in their top 100. But Matt Ryan had a great year last year for the Falcons. His 2008, in his case, I looked at the 2008 Contenders College Auto PSA 10, $510 to start the season, $510 to end the season. No change. I was surprised by that one. Why did Matt Ryan, who was the 5th highest production guy last year in fantasy football, not see a bump in his card prices? And, maybe it's because the Falcons didn't make the playoffs. And that's probably what it was. Even though he had a great year, the team didn't have a great year. And he wasn't around to be hyped up in the postseason. So probably why. The number 6 player last year in fantasy football production was Alvin Kamara. Alvin started the season at $128 and ended the season at $201. So as you would expect, he had a great year last year and his card prices went up. Number 7, Ben Roethlisberger. He started the year at $3,651 for his 2004 Contenders Auto PSA 10. It's a pretty rare card. So they're hard to find. There weren't many sold over the last couple of years. Ended the year with a sale at $6,900. So that's surprising because the Steelers didn't make the playoffs last year. But, Ben had really good production. He was a top 10 fantasy guy last year. I'm thinking, though, that jump may have been because that particular card is so rare that, it just, as he's getting towards the end of his career, but continuing to have good years, that he just saw appreciation, regardless of the performance. The number 8 guy last year, DeAndre Hopkins, his 2013 Contenders rookie ticket, auto PSA 10, was $185 at the beginning of the year. At the end of the year was $188, a 1.62% change. So not a big bump, maybe because the Texans weren't particularly impressive in the playoffs. And the number 9 guy, Deshaun Watson, also from the Texans. Now this is an interesting one. His rookie ticket auto, $1,240 to start the season, $730 to end the year. Negative 41%. That one actually really surprised me. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me because he had a really good year last year. I don't know if it was, there was just so much hype about him and his rookie year that his prices were really still inflated going into last year because he was so hyped the first year around. That maybe his prices were just simply too high, and it really didn't matter how he performed last year, short of making the Super Bowl. He was going to have a difficult time to maintain his card prices coming off of his rookie season. The number 10 guy last year was Devontae Adams. Man, this one was a little surprising too. He started the year at $104, ended the year at $74. But, maybe because the Packers didn't make the playoffs. He had a great year production-wise, but the Packers were pretty disappointing last year. The number 11 guy is Ezekiel Elliott. Man, this is, maybe another bit of a surprise. Started the year at $535, ended the year at $380. Actually dropped 29% during the season last year. Even though he had a really good productive year last year, I don't know. Maybe a lot of people thought that the Cowboys were going to go a little further in the playoffs than they did. But whatever it is, he dropped last year. And then your number 12 production guy last year, Andrew Luck. Now he did the opposite. He shot up last year. He started the year at $1,136, ended the year at $2,076. Again, this is for a Contenders rookie ticket auto PSA 10. 83% increase last year for Andrew Luck. And I think that is because, he had been injured for 2 years in a row. There were a lot of questions swirling around the condition of his neck. No one knew what they were going to get when he came back last year. A lot of people were fearing the worst. So his cards had probably gone down quite a bit during the period he was injured. And so last year when he came back and he really proved that not only was he good, but the Colts were really good last year, his cards jumped up quite a bit. So If you had put money into those 12 guys, the 12 guys who ended the year as your top 12 fantasy football players, if you had put an equal amount of money into all 12 of their cards right before the season started, and then you had sold all of those cards right when the season ended, you would have made a 50% profit last year, a 50% profit. But a large part of that 50% profit was driven by Patrick Mahomes. If you had done that without Patrick Mahomes, you would have made a 12% profit. So still decent, still pretty good actually over the course of a football season to be able to make 12%. But certainly not as good without Patrick Mahomes included in there. But here's the problem with this. You cannot really take what I just told you and do that this year because you don't know who's going to end the year in the top 12. This is looking back at the players who actually did end last year in the top 12. But right now we're sitting preseason 2019 and we're not sure who the top 12 guys are going to be. So all we can look at are what the projections are for this year's 2019 season. So that got me wondering, what if we went back to the 2018 preseason projections? How did those guys fare over the course of the season and what did their card prices do? Because that would more accurately tell us if we could take this year's fantasy football projections and bet on the guys at the top of the projections and actually see any type of profit. So I went back and looked at last year's beginning of season rankings. So this was the rankings for the draft period. These were the rankings that everybody was using when they were drafting their fantasy football teams last year, 2018. And I'm using ESPN's 2018 preseason fantasy football PPR rankings. So that's the list that I was looking at here. So the number one guy last year going into the year in the rankings was Todd Gurley. And as we already heard, Todd Gurley started the season at $140, ended the season at $140. Dead even. So if you had bet on Todd Gurley last year, it wouldn't have helped. You would have been an even exchange. The number two guy in ESPN's rankings last year going into the season was David Johnson. David Johnson started the year at $111 and ended the year at $51. His card prices dropped by 54%. And that was his 2015 Contenders rookie ticket auto PSA 10, dropped by 54%. He did not have nearly as strong of a season last year. Obviously injury issues and production wasn't as good as what we had seen from him in the past. And the Cardinals were also awful last year. So you just had a lot of different things happening that really hurt him last year. His cards dropped tremendously. He has not been able to yet get back to those levels that he had a couple of years ago when he was just, the number one guy pretty much in fantasy football that year and when he had a lot of hype around him. The number three guy at the beginning of the season, PPR rankings, was Ezekiel Elliott. And as we already learned, Ezekiel Elliott's cards actually dropped from $535 to $380, a 29% drop over the course of last season. The number four guy was Alvin Kamara. And as we already learned, his prices increased. He went from $128 to $201, a 57% increase over the course of the season. Because, he began the season number 4 in the rankings, ended the season number 6 in the rankings. But I think what probably helped him quite a bit was the Saints' success in the playoffs and the fact that the Saints were a very offensive team last year. They were getting a lot of hype and excitement and had a really good run in the playoffs and probably should have been in the Super Bowl. The number 5 guy in the preseason rankings last year was Antonio Brown. His card prices to start the season were $1,138. To end the year, his card prices were $740. His cards lost 35% in value during the year. And of course, the Steelers did not make the playoffs. He was a problem in the locker room. There was a lot of controversy surrounding him last year. I suspect that all, led up to why. The number 6 guy in the preseason rankings last year was Saquon Barkley. And as we already learned, his cards actually dropped over the course of the season, even though he was the number 2 guy in production for the season. His cards went from $520 down to $340. And as I said before, I think that's because there was such a limited supply of his cards at the beginning of the season, and there was so much hype that as more and more sets came out over the course of the season, his card prices naturally softened a little bit. The number 7 guy in the preseason rankings last year was Dalvin Cook. His card prices started the year at $45 for his 2017 Contenders rookie ticket auto, non-graded because there weren't enough graded ones of his for sale to make this comparison. And he ended the season at $31. So his card prices decreased by 31% over the course of the season. A season last year where he did not end the season, ranked anywhere close to number 7. And so perhaps people felt he had a little bit of a disappointing year. And, maybe Minnesota had a little bit of a disappointing year last year as well. The number 8 guy, Melvin Gordon, he started the year at $41, ended the year at $36, a 12% decrease. I was a little surprised by that because the Chargers were pretty good last year. Melvin Gordon was a really nice player last year. But, maybe he still didn't quite deliver to the level that people thought he was going to. Obviously, he was number 8 preseason, but did not finish top 10. So I guess he underperformed a little bit compared to expectation. Number 9, Julio Jones, he started the year at $198, ended the year at $320. So Julio Jones saw a 61% increase over the course of the season, which is pretty strange, to be honest, because, Matt Ryan did not see any increase over the course of the season. Julio Jones had a good season last year, a very good season, but he was not in the top 10. So I'm a little bit, and the Falcons didn't make the playoffs. So I'm a little bit surprised that his cards increased over the course of the year. But they did. And, I remember he had some contract concerns at the beginning of the year. So maybe people were a little soft on his card prices, or, concerned about where his contract was going to go and that kind of thing. I don't know. DeAndre Hopkins was the number 10 guy in the preseason fantasy football rankings last year at $185 a card before the season, ended the year at $188, so a 1.62% increase. As I said earlier, maybe just because the Texans were disappointing in the playoffs when they got there, I don't know. The number 11 guy last year in the preseason fantasy football rankings was Odell Beckham Jr. He started the year at $153 and ended the year at $190. So despite the Giants being really bad, Odell still saw an increase of 24% in his card prices over the course of the year. And then the number 12 guy in the preseason fantasy football rankings last year was Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen's rookie card was only $13, non-graded, but that's his 2013 Contenders rookie ticket auto. Ended the year at $9. So his card prices went down by 31% over the course of the season last year. So if you had put an equal amount of money into the top 12 guys in the preseason fantasy football rankings last year before the season started, and then you attempted to sell all of those cards right when the season ended, you would have lost 6.85%. You would have experienced almost a 7% loss over the course of the season. So I think that means the question that I posed at the beginning, do fantasy football projections indicate good football card investments? The answer for 2018 was clearly no. They did not. The preseason fantasy football rankings did not indicate the players whose cards you should be buying over the course of the year. So I was kind of discouraged by this result. I was hoping that we would see better results. So I started thinking what other indicators might tell you before the season starts whose cards to invest in. And so another indicator you could look at would be the teams that are likely going to make deep playoff runs. What about the star players on the teams that are likely going to make deep playoff runs? How would their cards fare over the course of the season? So I went back and looked at the star players for the final 4 teams last year: New England, Los Angeles Rams, Kansas City Chiefs, and New Orleans Saints, to see how their prices evolved over the course of the season. I'm going to go through these quickly. Tom Brady saw his card prices increase by 1 to 2% last year. Not a big increase. Maybe at this point, people have just become so accustomed to Tom Brady winning championships. What's another championship, right? So he did not see a big spike in his card prices after last year. But again, he's been around forever and he's won a bunch of championships already. So I think people were already, considering him certainly one of the all-time greats, and maybe another championship doesn't, cause him to get any greater when many already consider him to be the greatest of all time. Julian Edelman, his card prices did go up quite a bit last year. They went up 75%, from $63 at the start of the season to $110 at the end of the season for his Contenders rookie ticket auto. Sonny Michel. Sonny Michel started the year not a super hyped rookie. He was only $18 for his Contenders draft college ticket auto going into the season, ended the season at $38. A increase of 111%. Rob Gronkowski also saw a 52% increase, and that was his Topps Chrome PSA 10 rookie card because there weren't enough Contenders of him sold, so I had to go to a different set to do that comparison. But a 52% increase for Rob Gronkowski over the course of the year last year. So the Patriots overall did see their star players' card prices increase up quite a bit after winning the championship last year. How about the Rams? How did the Rams do? This is a little more interesting. Jared Goff, his card prices actually dropped a little bit. Jared Goff's Contenders rookie ticket auto cracked ice. That's the one I'm using to compare here. $1,275 at the beginning of the season, $1,103 at the end of the season, a decrease of 13.5%. Maybe that's because of how bad the Rams looked in the Super Bowl. Perhaps. Because they really fell flat. So there wasn't a big, point of emphasis at the end of the season to cause his card prices to go up. I don't know. Todd Gurley, we've already talked about, his card prices were completely flat last year. Robert Woods and Aaron Donald, both of those guys did see their card prices go up quite a bit. Their cards were super cheap. Robert Woods' rookie ticket autos going into the season were only $2 a card from 2013. And to end the season, they were $6 a card. So you had a nice increase there. And then Aaron Donald, his 2014 Contenders rookie ticket auto cards were $20 at the start of the season. And at the end of the season, they were $57. So a really nice increase there. So 200% for Robert Woods, 185% for Aaron Donald in terms of card increase. So some of the guys on the Rams did see that big benefit from the playoff run. The Chiefs, we already talked about Patrick Mahomes. He went crazy last year. His card prices went up by 462%, which was awesome. Tyreek Hill's card prices went up by 177%. He had a great year in terms of card prices last year. At the beginning of the year, you could have bought his rookie ticket auto Contenders for $26, and at the end of the year, it was $72. And Travis Kelce, his card prices went from $41 to $51 on his rookie ticket autos, so a 24% increase. On the Saints, surprisingly, Drew Brees' card prices dropped a little bit last year. He had a great season. The Saints had a great season. They really should have been in the Super Bowl, but Brees saw his card prices drop by 20%. And with Brees, I had to use his Topps PSA 10. It was $250 to start the season, $200 at the end of the season. Maybe the expectations were just so high on him that the Saints were going to win the Super Bowl. A lot of people thought they were last year, that how the season ended was a disappointment. I don't know, but I was surprised to see his card prices drop a bit. Alvin Kamara, his card prices went from $128 to $201, as we've already talked about, a 57% increase. And Michael Thomas's card prices increased by 89% last year, going from $35 to $66 for his rookie ticket auto. So if we were able to predict the teams that were going to make deep playoff runs, that is actually a better area to look at, in my opinion, investing in the star players on those teams rather than trying to predict who's going to be good at fantasy football next year. So a couple of things I learned from all of this and how it might relate to how you want to invest in football cards this season. So one thing that I learned is to try to pick up and coming players who aren't expected to be a full out star next year, but turn out to be, right? So obviously your Patrick Mahomes was that. And we saw what his card prices did. Christian McCaffrey was that last year, moving all the way up to third in production. He really saw the benefit of that. Alvin Kamara had a really great year last year. So some of those guys who maybe weren't expected to be your very top stars, but they really grew into those roles. Obviously, they saw their card prices go up a lot. And then also the star players on the up and coming teams that beat expectations last year, that the teams that did better than perhaps what was expected of them. And made deep playoff runs. The star players on those teams also saw good increases last year as well. So as I'm looking towards this year, I pulled up the Vegas odds for the teams that Vegas gives the greatest chance of winning the Super Bowl this year. And the two teams on top at 6-1 odds, no surprise here, the New England Patriots and the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I would suggest that any player on the Patriots or the Chiefs at this point probably isn't going to have a whole lot of opportunity to appreciate this year. Maybe if the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, maybe you'll see some guys like Mahomes' cards go up a little bit further, but he already got a crazy increase last year from the playoff run that they had and the season that they had, that I wouldn't necessarily bet on the Chiefs or the Patriots this year because they're the favorites in so many people's minds. Same with the Saints. The Saints are 10-1 in terms of odds to go to the Super Bowl. And they had the run last year already. So I don't think I would place my money there. Where I would put my money this year, where I'm looking, is actually this next set of teams. The Rams are 12-1, probably not the Rams because, again, already in the Super Bowl, I've already seen that appreciation. But also 12-1 next year for the Super Bowl are the Philadelphia Eagles and the Indianapolis Colts. And I do think there are opportunity for guys on those teams, maybe a Wentz, maybe the Philadelphia makes it under Wentz's leadership this year instead of under, a couple of years ago when he was injured, obviously when they went to the Super Bowl and Nick Foles had to take him there. So maybe Wentz could have a breakout year this year and you could see his prices go up. Luck's prices, although they already went up a lot last year, if he wins the Super Bowl, his prices will absolutely go up further. So maybe Luck is a good guy to take a chance on this year and to think that the Colts are going to be really good. Of course, you have to see what's going on with his injury situation. Although his injury situation that he's going through right now, maybe that's keeping his car prices down a little bit. So perhaps this actually is a good time to get on Andrew Luck. And then the next team, the Chicago Bears at 14-1. The Bears were pretty good last year. And perhaps if the Bears can make a deep playoff run, maybe make it all the way to the Super Bowl this year. Certainly they've got the defense to do so. Maybe some of their stars have the opportunity to see their card prices go up this year. So some things to think about. Unfortunately, it's not super simple, right? It takes work to figure out the good sports card investments. There's not a magic formula in these numbers, but with a little bit of ingenuity and a little bit of luck, picking the right guys, hopefully you and I will have a great year this year with watching our football cards appreciate. I'm working on some new episodes. I'm really excited. I'm working on my first few episodes for baseball. We've got the baseball playoffs coming up. Up to this point, I've mainly talked about basketball and football, and I'm excited to start talking a little bit more about baseball as well with the playoffs coming up. Also working on an interesting episode, how reading population reports can help you find undervalued investments. So, is there a way to look at population reports through PSA's website or through Beckett's website, the grading companies, and find some undervalued investments by looking at those? So I'm going to share that with you over the next couple of weeks. As I mentioned earlier, join the Discord channel. The link to that is in the show notes, so we can talk about this episode and our other episodes there and anything you want to talk about. And please subscribe. It really, really helps me when you subscribe, when you comment, when you leave reviews. And if you subscribe on YouTube, hit that little bell icon because that will let you know when I release a new episode. So if you're interested in hearing episodes about baseball and you're interested in hearing the episode about the population report, the best way to get notified by that is to hit the little bell icon on YouTube once you subscribe, and then also to subscribe to the podcast, which is available on iTunes and Spotify and all major podcast platforms. Thank you guys for joining me for another episode of Sports Card Investor. Look forward to seeing you on the next one.